Okay, well, welcome everyone to our 12th Professional Pandas Meetup. We just renamed it. It had, up until now, it had been the Scalable Pandas Meetup, but we thought that this is actually more in line with the scope of what we've been doing, because scale is a big part of it, but there's just a lot of things to writing professional pandas code and productionizing that code. So I'm so excited to be here today with folks from Prefect. George is going to speak with us. We also have Jeff here. And my name is Peter Olson. I'm the chief of staff at Ponder. I was a senior data scientist at Coursera before I came to Ponder. And I was an intern at Quora a while ago in data science and other places. So a lot of this will come from the perspective of data scientists more than, at least my participation is more from that lens than it is from data engineering or something else. So we'll briefly talk about meetup goals. We'll do some quick introductions, and then we'll dive into the main event, which is orchestrating Pandas code with Prefect. So I'm really excited about this. You can see we rebranded so freshly. I forgot to even change this. It still says Scalable Pandas Meetup on this page. What are these meetups about? So they're focused on how do you write professional Pandas code and how do you productionize that code? Pandas is awesome. It's super flexible. So many people use it. And yet there are lots of moments in which actually getting something put into production, doing something at scale, you're limited by pandas in various ways. And so we're talking about, like, in these meetups, we talk about what are good ways to use pandas in a professional context, and then also kind of next-gen solutions to problems faced by the Pandas API. Who is Ponder? We're the enterprise-ready Pandas company. We are the primary maintainers of the open source library Modin, which has over 10 million downloads. It's a scalable drop-in replacement for pandas. You just change import pandas as PD to import modin.pandas as PD and parallelizes your pandas code. And we're really excited. Our product, which we launched a couple months ago in public beta, lets you, and we'll hear a little bit more about this today, but it lets you use the Pandas API, but then it pushes the compute to your data warehouse. So we'll talk more about that. Why did Ponder start these meetups? Our goal is to create a community and learning materials content around professional pandas code and working with pandas at scale. How can I get involved? You can email me at peter@ponder.io. We'd love for guest speakers. There's lots of formats we can use. If people want to share a pandas use case, yeah, lots of options. I get to introduce George. I'm happy to do this. This is great. George is director of sales engineering at Prefect. Previously a senior solutions architect there, former head of engineering at Slate Data, cloud service architect at Ahead. And I was looking at George's past experiences and jobs, and I was really interested, George, that you volunteered for a very long time with I don't know what it's called, but sort of like a horse therapy organization where people, as a form of a source of healing and help, can ride horses. You were there. You did that for a long time, is my recollection from what I saw. So that's really cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's fascinating you brought that up, actually. That's not something I talk about very often, but yeah, therapeutic horseback riding, hippotherapy, is proven to be incredibly helpful for folks with special needs in a number of different ways. And I was active in that, got involved with the Boy Scouts actually when I was young, and I helped out and built barns and ran lessons for better part of, I think, 12, 13 years. I don't know, a long time. Whenever I'd come back from Montana or wherever I was at the time, I want to stop by the barn. Wild drop. I did not expect to talk about that today.
Well, and it's beautiful. It's yeah, it's great. Okay, well, with that, I'll turn it over to George for our session, which is orchestrating Pandas code with Prefect. Yeah, so I'll stop sharing.
Cool. Yeah. So a little bit about me to understand kind of where my perspective comes from. I think it's a really interesting thing to understand where people's, software is a big space, and we all come from different pedigree of whether we're more on the ML side, academic side, ops side, what have you, that really informs the way we see the problems that we encounter and the way we solve them. So I am an ops guy. I started my career as Linux sysadmin. I moved into DevOps because that's what Linux sysadmins did back then. They don't exist anymore. And spent a long time in cloud engineering. I got into the data space because I saw it as the new frontier of challenge. We'd gotten really far with automation and CI/CD and cloud engineering, et cetera, in the general application space. And the data space was getting far and far more complex, with the appetite for data, the size of data, the volume of data increasing on a daily basis, if not minute by minute basis. And folks kept on saying, I want real time, I want it now, I want whatever. And it's a hard problem to solve. And those of you who are on here, I'm guessing at some point in time, you've gone down the path of data engineering or data science, and at some point in time, ops and infrastructure got involved. Not in a way that you were inviting, but because it had to happen. All of a sudden, things get challenging. And so Slate is actually a company that myself and Anthony from over here started. We were a very, very focused firm out of Chicago on consulting around like data ops and infrastructure, so surrounding the data space. And Prefect picked us up on an acquisition a few years ago, and it's been really, really fun because I've been using Prefect since almost the beginning of Prefect. And to join them has been incredibly fun because I think that Prefect solves the problem of orchestration and observability in a very elegant way. And it's in line with the way that I believe this type of work should be done. And when I was introduced to Ponder from Alejandro, I was blown away. One of the things that a lot of people will encounter, and especially the data engineering side, I'm not going to talk too much about data science, mostly in the data engineering like prep piece, but it still correlates, is that at some point in time, it becomes very challenging to resource effectively and scalably onto the data as it increases. As you get a lot of out of memory issues, we start blowing up computers, we start pegging CPUs, things get just challenging. And so I have been gassing up Ponder quite a bit because this is why my SQL is not good. So when DBT hit the scene, and God love DBT, I think it's an incredible tool for empowering analysts and folks who traditionally are the consumers of data engineering work or any kind of data sanitation work. Usually it's a kind of a fence issue, similar to the DevOps, like data engineering does the work, analysts have to consume that work and then put another request into data engineers. DBT helped flatten that out in a very DevOpsy type way to empower these analytics engineers, right, that we're familiar with seeing. That's awesome. It's incredible. Problem is, I don't like SQL. I'm not very good at it. I'm okay. I can get by if I need to, but I'm a lot better at Pandas. My Python came from ops, and Pandas is really, really easy to use. The data science side is not really my cup of tea as much, but the simple like API interface that Pandas exposes is incredible. So when you got Ponder into the mix, all of a sudden we have the ability to manipulate our data at rest in an API that we're familiar with. But the next piece comes with the other part that DBT brings to the table, which is the DAG, right? They have this graphical interface and dependency that, of course, Python does a good job of, but when we want to get into production with Ponder or a tool like it, we need a bit more observability, dependency, resiliency, et cetera. And that's where Prefect comes in. So got a demo today that I yanked off Ponder's site and I wrapped in some Prefect. I'm going to show it to you. I'm just VS Code. So this is, I took the taxi example and I threw some Prefect around it. Now I actually have this same thing in functions only. This is pure Python, right? We see just a bunch of functions. I disabled some logging from Modin. You guys, great logging, a little verbose for a demo, so thank you though. We grab this data set from Ponder's GitHub. We do some just operations on the data, just what have you, fairly generic, just for the sake of an example. And I add this in right here on line 36. Random failure, right? And because this is, 1 and 2 is a pretty high chance of failure for any given API, but especially on network calls, this is generally where we're going to see things like retries, caching, et cetera, like comes into play in a really meaningful way. And then some Prefect-y stuff where I'm creating artifacts, which I can do in or out of Prefect. I don't have to be in a Prefect flow to do this. I'll talk about artifacts in a second, but essentially it's a way to persist information from a flow run, which is like a function run in Prefect, in a way that's going to be human digestible or accessible. And then we have the Ponder init. We got our API connection. I'm actually using a block from Prefect. So instead of having to use the credentials .json for my service account for GCP, we can load this in Prefect and we'll obfuscate everything in what's called a block. Blocks are a Prefect interface that are essentially a Pydantic class that's represented server side in a graphical way or API way that people can interact with and extend client side. We can talk more about blocks and questions if you'd like to, but it's an interface that I think is very, very interesting and empowers our users to extend our interfaces ad infinitum. And then, of course, we got our configuration and our steps from an assembly function side of the house. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to remove this one. It's going to be weird, but I'm gonna go ahead and run this. Python functions only. I upgraded it, but it's still giving me this thing. So I don't know what's going on there, but neither here nor there. We got a warning, which I'm completely disregarding because I think that Ponder is incredibly stable so far. I've had a great experience. I don't know about this early access thing. Oh, it randomly failed. God bless. That's a danger when you don't have like an orchestrator around our Python functions. I'm just gonna rip it again for the sake of doing it. So this is what it looks like when we run a Ponder or any of our stuff in a normal Python function. Failure can happen. Things are brittle. It ran successfully, exited 0. Lovely. Now let's look at this when we run this as a prefect flow. Exact same code. I just added some razzle dazzle to it. So on my first function, I threw a task on it, gave it a nice human readable name, decided to log the prints. I'm going to filter my passenger charges. I have some process tip amounts, analyze passengers. Let's create artifact task. What did I just do? I broke something. What broke here? Well, let me try this one more time. What did I just do? Let me get a random failure though. I'm going to try this one more time to try and get a random failure out of it. But the cool thing though is what this looks like when we look at it in the Cloud UI. So this is me running prefect flows just kind of ad hoc, which we can do. We don't have to deploy our flows to run them, which is a great development tool, but we're going to talk also about how to get our flows into production, which is traditionally an inconvenience. This is what it looks like for the flow we literally just ran, this unselfish goose. We use adjective animal. We can see all the same things we saw there. And I also surfaced an artifact, which is the df.describe for one of these data frames. So let's say our engineers need to know what happened in a given flow run. They're like, oh, like our source data downstream looked incorrect. So let's review kind of the outputs of that. So we can surface this information in a way that's easy for our users to investigate and understand. I think this is incredibly powerful because oftentimes we want to have some of those forensics, especially as artifacts of Orchestrator. Let's go back to our flow run. Let's even go back to our master flows here. So let's see, we were at this one, and this one came right after it. I have a failure in here. Man, I'm not triggering my retries. All right, so this is like kind of what the experience of just like running locally looks like. And so this is awesome. We love this observability. We love the visual context. We love being able to drill into things, understand things like metrics around duration, which is great for our folks in data science want to know their models are effective. We can add tags to these things to add a little bit more aggregators or easy ways to navigate through. We love all that. We can even do graphs of graphs. We can do all kinds of things. Results of the way we persist and cache in between tasks. Features galore. But the biggest thing that I think is really relevant for this community is how do we get this into production? The path of production, the path to deployment is always, inconvenient. We have to do stuff. We have to think about infrastructure. We have to think about operations. We have to think about all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and show y'all. I do not have any of the code written already for this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it live. The steps it takes to put Prefect into the world. Look at this, still no failures. I'm gonna do one more run because I really want this to fail. In the meantime, I'm gonna fire up a brand new terminal instance. I'm gonna activate my PyM. I'm a PyM guy. I'm not a Conda guy. Judge me if you want. And Prefect provides a lovely little thing called a init. Now, when I do Prefect init, I have to select how I'm storing my flows. This is Python. We don't do artifacts. It's just code-based storage, right? And my options are a bunch of things: object storage options, Git-based options, and local storage options, or container-based options. I like containers a lot for production. For the sake of my example, I'm gonna do Git. I'm gonna do Git, and so we're gonna create. It'll create this project concept with a prefect.yaml. So I'm gonna open up this prefect.yaml. We're gonna see what just got generated on my behalf. So this is all null right now because there's no deployments that have been created. A deployment is the metadata about a flow being what we just looked at, the parent of all of our graph. A flow is analogous to a graph. And generally, it is an assembly function calling our task functions. We see these 3 steps: build, push, and pull. These are how we can specify how we have side effects or artifacts from our build process pushed out to wherever. Generally, it's a Docker container. We can build images on our user's behalf. Push can be things like uploading code to object stores, etc. And pull defines how our flows should be fetched when it's time to run our flows. This is all like incredibly templatable, and I'm going to give you a very bare example of all these things, but it's a very, very flexible YAML and Python interface to ensure that CI/CD is easy and explicit. We're trying to give a path for that. We don't want our users to have to figure it out. We're trying to make sure that the path to production is fairly clear. So now I'm going to do prefect deploy. This is where things get kind of cool. Prefect deploy. And we're actually going to navigate and try and find flows, flow decorators in our codes. We found taxi pipeline in our flow.py, the one I want to deploy. It absolutely is. Obviously, manually is not the only way you can do this. We have like a whole bunch of ways to make sure this is like fully like a -y option. So deployment name, I'm going to call it default. This is needed deployment, is needed name, no schedule either. And I have these work pools. Work pool is the way we can assign our deployments, which is again metadata about how to run our flows to a given group of work. And then we'll have a hub and spoke kind of model. So in your own infrastructure, we'll have a worker that's pulling your work pool and going to be running based on the infrastructure configurations there and applied. On the work pool level, we can also set infrastructure like defaults, like how we want our stuff to run, job specs, labels, tags, memory requests, whatever you're running in, depending on the infrastructure that you selected, whether you're on GCP Vertex, Cloud Run, ECS, Kubernetes, subprocess, local, Docker. Like we have 1,000 options. Oh, that's not true. We have like 12 options for running your flow code, but enough that we basically serve everything out there. We even have from Prefect 1 people running on Nomad. If you guys know what Nomad is, you get an extra point for me, but no one uses that. Sorry for Nomad users. I'm going to use this process work pool because I already have it created. I think it's not too custom, so it should be fine. And so then it says successfully created with ID foo and bar. I can view this in my my UI, which I'll show you in a second. Do you want to save the configuration? I do. In fact, we see it just got appended right here. So now our file remains source of truth. Infrastructure is code ask. We love that. So now I have some instructions I can run. Do I want to start my work pool called process, and do I want to run my deployment? So I'm actually going to go ahead and highlight this, go back to my other terminal. And else, I don't know if that's going there. That was the failure I wanted to happen. And my work pool was just, or my worker was just started. Excellent. I'm going to pop over to the UI in a second and navigate through all the stuff we just did. I'm actually going to go here. And first things first, I'm going to run what I just deployed. Will this cause any issues with Git? I don't think so. We are cloning from GitLab for this. I don't think I did anything that'll break. We will find out, won't we? All right, I'm actually on my other screen now. You guys can see my burrowing Guillemot. Excellent. All right, it failed because probably I configured this to clone into somewhere I shouldn't have. Oh yeah. Branches main. Prefect demos. Oh, and I configured that way. That all looks fine. Wait, did I push this?
My perspective on any live demo is it feels like the closest thing we have in tech to like UFC or something like that. You're hopping to an arena with who knows what. I
always do live demos on everything because I can't help myself but to see if I can do it.
It's great. It's the best way. Yes.
I don't know why I'm like this. All right. Yeah. Okay. So this is old, and it's because I probably changed my source. Prefect demos. This is on that. There we go. All right.
And actually, I should say too, in all seriousness, I think that demos like this are much more helpful when not everything goes right, because it's very easy to watch. This happens to me. I look at some example of something and it's all perfect and I think, oh great, and I go to do myself and like I get weird environment problems or like who knows or all sorts of stuff. And I think the harder thing to learn is actually what do you do? What's the mental process for saying, okay, it didn't work, then what do I do next? I genuinely think that's true.
I'm so glad you appreciate that, because there are pieces like, if you like, I'm trying to illustrate that it's easy to get things out into the world with Prefect, and for me to do that with the code already written and all pre-canned, that doesn't show you anything. That just shows you how easy for me to do it with pre-canned code. So we're from scratch here. So I just pushed my code. I had not committed, God bless. And now we're gonna do this. Look, we'll do a little quick run. Dance for me, Beetle. There's a pun on the name of the thing.
It's great. I love the naming convention.
And we got a flow running. It's that easy. Prefect makes it so easy to get into prod. So this is running on a local agent. It's running on sub process in my example. Doing the same thing with Docker, Kubernetes, any of the rest of them is just as easy. So like, you know, and again, every single thing that you saw in the demo run where I ran it from my local is present here. And of course, we have like a whole concept of how you can switch in your local development environment between like local development APIs, dev, staging, prod environments, how to gate those things, all the enterprise ready features you might need to ensure that there's gates between your development environments. I'll stop right here because I think I covered a ton of ground really, really quickly. If anyone wants to see anything, I'm down to, I will live dev at whatever you want. To not guarantee effectiveness or success, but this is Prefect. We make it easy to observe, react, understand what's going on in your pipelines, how to get to prod really fast, and especially when you have like a tool like Ponder in the mix, it's so easy to like grab data, load data to a data warehouse, take advantage of that infinite scalability so that your work, like your actual like the work that you're doing on your Kubernetes process, whatever, never blows up. No out of memories, no peg CPUs, and we get to do everything the same Pythonic way that we're used to. So we get the DAG or the graphs. We actually traverse and do runtime discovery. No DAGs necessary, but you get the graph, you get the understanding, you get the dependencies, all the bells and whistles with Ponder's like access to infinite scale.
So just, I think for my benefit, let's just recap. So you have this taxi data set, and the goal is to, in this case, run an analysis on this data set. With Ponder, you can use Pandas API, but you can point to the location of your data and use the compute resources of like BigQuery or Snowflake or something. The beautiful thing about Prefect is Prefect, it seems to me, is Python first. It does other things too, but it's especially powerful in a Python context where you just, I love the phrase I've heard you use in other videos too, of like sprinkling decorators. I think that's a great description of like, you have these tasks and flows, you run your flow. And what you just showed us too is how easy it is to go from running it in test to deploying. One question I have is, again, I come at this from a data science lens, and so I understand less of the infrastructure side. And so sometimes I let myself ask questions I'm embarrassed about because I suspect other people might have similar questions. So I'll put myself on the, as the sacrifice here. So I am often confused when I hear discussions about test versus deploying. Like productionizing something, like actually deploying it. Typically what that means is my understanding is you're moving off your local machine. You can test things on a small machine in the cloud maybe, and then deploy them to a larger cluster or something like that. But when people talk about like how hard it is to deploy, is that because you're often moving from sort of single-threaded to a cluster, like single machine to a cluster context? Like what makes deploying hard? And yeah.
It's actually a really interesting question. I remember a long time ago, Taylor, who was on here, is one of the sales engineers here at Prefect. Oh yeah, I'm also, director of sales engineering. You covered that though, thank you. She asked me if I could maybe write like a decision tree of how to choose what infrastructure to deploy your code on. And it's an incredibly hard thing because like there's n number of options. You can choose all kinds of things. There's so many different things that go into the decision of like how. It's like, okay, I don't want it off my laptop so I can go home on Friday and this keeps running. Well, how do I want to do that? Do I want to do it on a VM? VMs seem easy because you just get a VM and you can like configure it by hand and it feels good. But if it falls over, it falls over. We can daemonize it. Then what if the box dies itself and the daemonization isn't as applicable? And like there's all these things that go into it to ensure the level of resilience and consistency, monitoring, alerting, all that stuff that you need to have reliability with your data. Like one of the hardest things for data teams that I've worked with across so many verticals, so many industries, is as soon as anybody downstream from the data team says the data doesn't look right, the data team, the practice itself is now in question. Now, instead of having to like operate on new data, on whatever, like we're having to defend, we're having to be, you can't be proactive anymore. We're now being like reactive and there's the integrities in questions. Now people are maybe doing like shadow op stuff and going to other people, having their own analysts, or they just go doing DMs, whatever, right? So the path to production needs to be considered pretty sincerely. And like, you guys all built data pipelines before? Anybody productionalized any kind of data stuff? Yeah, I'm guessing this. Yes, I don't see any hands, but I'm guessing yes. It's a lovely thing to do from scratch. It's a nightmare to change. As soon as you have to make a change to the data code in prod, you have a lot of stuff to consider. You can't mess up. It can't be wrong in prod, right? Like data is data, like it's at rest. Like if you start messing with that and all of a sudden everything's wrong, like unless you have like a lot of stuff in play to ensure that you can rebuild or re-engineer or what have you, it's a thing. And all that in my book is about deploying to prod. It's not just about how the code itself is going to be run, it's about the architecture of your data practice itself. It's about data lakes, lake houses, layers, whatever, to ensure that you have a sustainable practice. The next thing is that like folks aren't infrastructure aware. Not a lot of people are very like know like what a good container is, how to write a good Docker file, how to configure a Kubernetes cluster to be both performant and cost effective, how to ensure that we scale appropriately using our infrastructure resources so that if the data volume goes up, our workflows don't fall over. That's a common one we see all the time. People provision their instances of whatever infrastructure type a certain way based on the data sets they're currently processing. Something happens downstream, an API changes, new data gets loaded in, whatever. And all of a sudden, out of memory, things are blowing up, things are falling over, and we have to go make changes to our infrastructure to accommodate that. So like, these are some of the things that can be massive snags in the path to productionalizing data code.
Okay, that's awesome. Yes, I have so many questions. If anyone else has questions, I think we can transition to formally into question asking mode, but I have so many questions. So for me, a big question is, it seems, this is a strategic thing, I guess. It seems like a lot of data tools handle some really important set of problems in a team's data stack. But it feels like more and more different data companies and open source projects are realizing that if they handle one thing that's very central, it makes sense to sort of expand to other things that are also included. Like, and so it's always a tricky thing, I think, designing a data stack, because you get overlapping functionality between things that like one might be called an orchestrator and one might be something totally different, but actually it has orchestration like features, and there's this slow sort of expansion. How do you think about when it makes sense? I ask this because I'm thinking about like data quality, for example, and Prefect is right in the middle of so much of people's data infrastructure that like, it seems to me like there's, you could easily append data quality stuff to, add those decorators, whatever. And then you're sort of moving into great expectations land and other things. And DBT does a little bit of sort of data check testing and things. How do you think about if you're I'll ask this from the perspective of the team designing the open source, designing the tool as opposed to the end consumer. Like, how do you think about like, what should Prefect say? Like, this is our core competency. We're really, really good at this. Let's get better at this, as opposed to like, hey, we should expand into these adjacent areas. Yeah.
That's a big question.
Yes, sorry.
I'll try to start talking and answer it at some point in time in my whatever monologue I'm going to get at. But I think from my end, like the best way to explain where Prefect fits into any kind of architecture diagram is wherever there's arrows. this to that, to this, to that, to this, to that, Prefect. This to that, then right back to your Great Expectations, to Big Eye, to who are my guys? Monte Carlo, Prefect. Like we service all those pieces. And so from our end, like, I don't know, like there's a lot of tools that are really purpose driven that do expand of like, well, we could also do some of this, but the more like we essentially, like you mentioned, like we extend Python in a very Pythonic way. You don't even need to have a cloud anything to run Prefect. You don't have like it's very in line with how you write Python anyway. That's my favorite thing. I don't have to write my code, then contort it to fit some other model. I just write my code, sprinkle a couple decorators and flow some tasks, we're out the door. And with that in mind, like we just want everyone to have, all of our users to have an easy time doing what they need to do. And as soon as we say that we do this one thing only, like you have to do only data aware work where like it has to have schemas and models and these and that. What if you want to do something else? Then what? And then it's like, then it breaks, right? So we try to stay like very open to allow our users to do what they want to do. One thing we learned from Prefect 1 is Prefect users are some of the most ingenious people, scrappy, ingenuitive folks I've ever come into contact with. We saw monkey patches, forks, subclassing of every flavor you could possibly imagine. DSLs. Well, we thought we've already covered all these things. People made GUIs of their own to on top of our APIs to provide even a simpler interface for their users. And so we built in Prefect 2 our interfaces with the intent to be extended. So whatever it is you're trying to do, you can probably do it with Prefect. The constant blocks, really easy to extend if you want to have some kind of schema and modeling. They're just Pydantic classes under the hood anyway. We have integrations that are really, it's all open source, it's all Python with a lot of the common players in the space. And I think the second thing that I want to echo is mention is there's kind of two types of work I see Prefect being done in Prefect. Either orchestration of external APIs. Like, honestly, Ponder almost falls into that category. You aren't exactly an API, but under the hood it kind of is, right? It feels like Pandas, but it's actually under the hood, it's Ponder. Or like doing work on the machine that's hosting the stuff. And a lot of times we have to mix and match. Either we're orchestrating external APIs or we have to do some actual Python work ourselves and tap into some of the integrations we have with Dask and Ray, async Python that Prefect supports natively. And so like that push and pull means that whatever you're trying to do, we probably already have support for in some capacity. So like we aren't really focused too much on like trying to do more of these like specific competition type feels. We want to bring more of what we believe is the usefulness of Prefect, which is like being able to react and understand what's happening. Our events API has come out a little bit ago, and one thing I would love to show you guys actually, while I finish this long form monologue, is our automations. A lot of folks at some point in time in their career had to create some kind of trigger or notification system off of whatever they just created. You know, we joke about if you give a data engineer a job, who limited my workspace stuff? Taylor, can I kill some of these? We need these, SE Dev. I'm killing this one.
I'm sorry.
Who limited me?
I do not believe
what? This is so bogus. Thank you. All right. Trigger. Flow. So we joke about if you give a data engineer a job, right? It's like, hey, can you real quick write this Python to move data from here to there and run this analysis? Sure, no problem. Takes you. What will it take you? Somebody says, hey, can you real quick write an ETL? What do you think an ETL takes you these days?
That's a great question. It's not very long. It's easy. It's fast.
45 minutes, maybe an hour.
True.
And then go, hey, Peter, can you maybe like put some like alerting and monitoring on that? You're like, what do you think? 2 hours?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe even less, maybe 1 hour. You're probably pretty fast. All right. Now I say, hey, Peter, can you deploy this? You go, where? Up to you. Oh, okay. Schedule it, right? What now the infrastructure fell over? Now you have to do something else. Now we're like 8 hours into an ETL, right? Has anybody been there before? You've been there where all of a sudden you have this small job that just crawls on you?
Yes, I will say, especially since you could do 80% of it fast, but then you're like, the next thing you know, you're in my case, in the Airflow docs being like, how do I do this one part, and anyway, yeah.
And so this is like the use, like why Prefect exists, like that whole story of like, if like, can you real quick, all of a sudden you're like, oh God. So oftentimes after we've done all this stuff, it's scheduled, whatever, we want to like have some automation. So someone gets alerted if something goes wrong or right or whatever. And we can say if a flow run enters or stays in, we can do this by tags too. We can say this is, we can specify how we identify these a number of different ways. Timed out, crashed or failed. I want you to cancel a flow run, pause a schedule, pause a work queue, resume a schedule, resume a work queue, send a notification, call a webhook, pause, whatever. We have all kinds of things we can do here. And we're going to do a Slack one or a PagerDuty one. And then you can use some Ginger to template it out and then you're done. And you can even have multiple actions here. So it hits Slack, it hits email, it hits PagerDuty, like woof from The Office, and you just get hammered from all sides of notifications. Ideally, we don't have to do that, but like we try to make all these things as easy as possible. And the last thing is this, to hopefully answer your question here, like automate events is a kind of where we're really focusing. We want to make sure that the React and observability piece of like all your work is as easy and easy to take advantage of as possible. So because we have like this like nice schema for these, you can create your own, publish your own, and trigger automations off all these as well. So whatever it is you're trying to do, we can be the brains and the state of your whole operation.
Yeah, that's awesome. So another question I had is has to do with the Python first nature of Prefect. So like this is this meetup today, orchestrating pandas in Prefect, and it's interesting because Prefect is obviously very good with data orchestration, and pandas is so central to data stuff in the Python ecosystem that it stands like orchestrating. It would be interesting to try to have a meetup like this, which was orchestrating non-pandas data stuff with Prefect. Like, maybe you have NumPy and you have, you get into like ML things and whatever. I'm interested, like what does it mean for Prefect to be Python first? And can you give examples of other orchestration things that aren't necessarily Python first?
So we're Python first because that's where the ecosystem is, right? Like we came from, our CEO was at one point in time the biggest Airflow contributor there was. He created XComs. We come from this problem space, right? Of folks trying to do ML, data engineer, whatever jobs, and it sucking. And so with Python, like we went that way, especially because the interfaces and the experience of being able to add Prefect on as decorators in a very non-invasive way is very in line with the way that Python is written. And one of the things we like a lot about why we stay in that language first, and we're also written in it, right? We're fast API, we're top, we're pretty full stack Python here, not front end, of course, but whatever, review on the front end. But as far as like we're API first is one of the things that sets us apart from a lot of other things. This is not like a registered DAG approach to this type of work. All state changes are all server side. So all of like, hey, can I change state? Hey, I think I'm finished. Hey, all these things, it all happens server side. So our source of truth has a great degree of integrity while still allowing runtime discovery of the nodes of our graph. Now, what this means at some point in time, if we so choose to do so, we could do this in other languages, maintaining the exact same API and orchestration that we have today with Python. I think one of the challenges for us is just ensuring that the developer experience is consistent, because not all languages are going to natively allow for that minimal interference with existing programming paradigms as Python does with decorators. But like we have the ability to go wherever we want to go. I think that the move to runtime discoverable versus registered DAG is one that I think philosophically is super, super solid. I think that you look at any DAG-based orchestrator, and the first thing they do is try and find a way to fudge the DAG. Try and find a way to add some kind of if or case type logic into it. When you look at the nodes itself, they look insane. It's, it's kludgy, like stuff happens in there. And we can just write if statements or while loops or whatever, just do normal Python stuff without having to like mess around. And so I think that, I don't know what the rest of the space is going to look like or go and do. I think that DAGs fit a lot of our work, but when they don't, they don't. And then we have to contort the tooling to try and fit that. And I think that the approach that we took is novel, is not revolutionary, is a bit of that's kind of hyperbole, but it's a whole new thing. I think that it fits a lot, way more of our work, probably 100% of it.
As you were talking, it made me think about a conversation I had with a person who works at another orchestrator. And I was talking about Ponder and the orchestrator there. And it became clear that their definition of an asset wasn't flexible enough to just sort of be put in front of an arbitrary function. And that like really limits, and that's because I won't mention who it was, but they had designed it for a particular use case in a particular ecosystem. So that's one thing that I think is super cool about, is that level of flexibility is awesome.
Yeah, I love and I support a lot of like there's no silver bullets. I've never seen a tool that does everything perfectly. And we've heard if you've been in this space, any tech space for a long time, it's like, oh, this will do everything. It's like, it won't. I promise you it won't. I've never seen something that does literally everything under the hood. So specialized stuff, do one thing well, I super support. And but because the one thing we do well is orchestrate Python, we do a lot of things really well.
Yeah. And I'm excited. I will say one of our like core philosophical tenets, like with the at Ponder, is that API should be separated from execution. So you already have like storage and compute separated, and that's been a really cool movement for the data world. And then we also think that like it's just weird that you're locked into a certain API if your data is housed in a certain place, stored in a certain format. So we're doing this with Pandas now, where the Pandas API, you can point it at a bunch of different like locations of your data, use the same API, life is good. And I'm really excited about a new future where additional APIs are added, and eventually there's this layer of abstraction. So I think that's super cool. I think my last question is putting you in the uncomfortable situation of sort of making guesses about the future. So like data right this second is going through, it feels to me, just reading on Twitter and LinkedIn, it's like such a churning moment because of these how good LLMs are at writing code. And I think one of the first examples I saw actually of an LLM writing something was it writing, in that case it was Airflow, but just like writing, it was just amazing how you could say, please do a thing that does this, and it pumps it out. We have a question from Alejandro, but I don't know if it's an inside joke or.
No, Marvin.
All right.
Marvin's a project that's from Prefect. Where is it? AskMarvin.ai. And if you want an AI engineering framework, we created one. And the one thing that you have to do with these things that cost money, that have steps, that do whatever, is it doesn't hurt to observe them, know what's going on, know the steps they took, know how many tokens you spent at ChatGPT. And Marvin's incredible. It's really, really, I can talk about this forever, but like if you need to create test data or test schemas or anything like that for your ETLs, your lower environments, whatever, like Marvin's amazing. It's got a ton of stars on GitHub. I think it's got, 3,000 stars on GitHub, and it's been out for what, a couple of months. We should have our 1.0 release. So we're not like scared of the space. We're uncomfortable talking about it. We talk about it all the time. And the problem space still remains, though, is like these things need to be observed. You can't just run stuff in the dark and pray it works okay. It's like that optimistic engineering is like, it's not my jam, man. I trust but verify my code.
Yeah, totally. And it seems like this sort of underlying data infrastructure that can lead to data you trust, sort of organization-wide systems where things are moving cleanly, reliably. It feels like, I'm not an expert on this, but that this is sort of the backbone for the new generation of even potentially working with your data stuff in a natural language. And there's all sorts of stuff it's going to have to sit on top of a really strong foundation.
Absolutely. So yeah, check out Marvin if you guys are interested in the LLM space. It's a really, really cool project, and it hooks directly into Prefect very nicely. If you want some observability into like what those pipelines, what those functions are up to. And thanks so much for having me. I had a great time with this meetup. I think your tool is revolutionary. Again, don't like SQL. I think that Ponder, even outside of the ML space, is an incredible tool for data engineers who are comfortable with Python. And I think the work you guys are doing is awesome.
Yeah, thanks, George. You would love attending our sprint demos. Where people are like, how do I implement this, this argument per like combination for this pandas function like in SQL, and then they do it and they figure it out, and it's like pretty amazing. So it's a cool. And the goal is we do this once, so no one ever has to do it again. Like pandas modulo is different from modulo in a bunch of other SQL operators. Like they will give different results, and understanding the nuances between like bridging the Python SQL world. Like no one should ever have to do this except for our poor engineers who get it right. Anyway, okay. Well, thanks so much, George, and for the Prefect team. This is awesome. We're super excited.
All right. Thanks so much, gang. Take care.